what is the best version of this year's Creighton team ceiling? What do you think could they win the Big East tournament? Can they move forward past that round of 32 in the NCAA tournament? Have you seen enough to feel confident in a further and extended run for the best version of Creighton?
Yeah, for the best version, I think they've shown they're capable of getting. They beat every team in the Big East.
Right.
They didn't get swept by anybody. They're one of two teams that beat St. John's.
You're listening to the Blue Jay Breakdown.
Welcome back, Blue Jay Breakdown here for Hurrdat Sports. I'm Austin Jacobsen, once again back in for Anna Bellinghausen, Jacob Padilla, Creighton grad hanging out with us once again. I tried to wear my blue. It's a different shade. This is my UNK blue, but not quite. Unfortunately for the Lopers, not tournament bound, but the Creighton men and women likely probably should be, and they will be moving forward, especially after the women have a pretty good run, but then ultimately, once again, run into UConn.
Yeah, and that's why Anna's not here, because she was out on assignment at the Big East tournament, heading straight to New York for the men's tournament. So, Anna, you can check out all her coverage from on site there. But we were watching from home.
Yes,
and it was. I think it's UConn. They won their 30th conference title, first program to win 30 conference tournament titles. Just insane.
Yep.
Paige Becker's third most outstanding player of the tournament, whatever their award is named. Just too much. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about kind of their run to get there, because this is a team that had fallen short in the tournament every year. They didn't get a chance to play UConn.
And they kind of tried to do it early too, but then they just completely found a way to reverse that curse in the semifinal. And they got all the praise heading into the final itself. In their first two games, they didn't necessarily Jekyll and Hyde themselves, but man, it was pretty close.
Yeah, they gave up 30 points in the second quarter against Georgetown, which not ideal.
No, not usually a winning formula.
No. They're trailing the second half, got back into it, made it a tight game late, and then they got to stop with the game tied, and Georgetown fouled Keani Lockett for some reason. Like the whole way, she's dribbling up the court, like through traffic, like looking for somebody else. Like, Lauren, where are you? Come get the ball, because there's like 4 seconds left. And Georgetown just reaches in and fouls. I don't know if they lost track at the time or thought, well, they're not going to call this, so let's just try to force a turnover. But they fouled her, put her to the line. She hit both, 6 for 6 in the game. So good job by Lockett stepping up and hitting those in the clutch. And then they got to stop on the other end to pull out the 72-70 win in their first game against Georgetown, and did not mess around in the semifinal against Seton Hall.
That was one of the most locked in performances that we've seen from them, including Big East play this season.
They were up 29-6 to start the game.
Pretty good.
Yeah, that giving up 30 points in a quarter, not a winning strategy. Getting up 23 points a couple minutes into the second quarter, very much so, because they gave up an 11-0 run, and it didn't ultimately even matter because they were up so much, and they were able to kind of right the ship and cruise through the second half. But made 7 of their first 12 threes. Good strategy there. So yeah, they looked really good. I think they probably felt pretty good about themselves going into the final. Lauren Jensen had 19 in that one. Morgan Molly 14. Kennedy Townsend 10 off the bench. They shot 12 of 23 from 3 in the game. So earned their first trip to the Big East Championship since 2016. First trip for this senior class.
And it is something to hang their hat on as well, because like you mentioned, hadn't gotten to that point when everyone kind of expected them to be there.
Yeah, and that's ultimately, you go in wanting to win. That's always the goal. But for this team, it wasn't win or bust. Like this is what they need to for themselves because of their previous tournament disappointment. So it was good to see them earn their opportunity to go take another shot at the best in the league. And unfortunately, their shot wasn't good enough.
Yeah, they were a little bit slow coming out of the gate, which is part of the course when playing UConn, it feels like.
27-11 first quarter.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen so far in this matchup, and Creighton, all their losses for the most part, outside of that South Dakota State one, which is also a good win. That's tournament team, conference titleist, whatever. But there's just a gap there in terms of athleticism, overall talent. And it was pretty apparent, like Creighton struggling for their life to create shots in that first half. There were a lot of like, we just got to throw something up because it's late in the clock there, or some turnovers. They just couldn't generate good looks, and did not make the shots that they did get off.
Yeah, and I'll make the argument too that it's not necessarily that Creighton maybe isn't living up to the moment when playing UConn. I think there have been some moments where they have, but UConn takes Creighton very seriously. They recognize the challenge.
There's a lot of respect there, and you heard them talking about it after the game, how tough Creighton is to play against and how locked in they have to be to defend the way they play. And again, Creighton gave UConn far and away a tougher test than anybody in the conference.
Yep.
And they performed better against them than some of the other the non-conference like powerhouses that UConn played against. So that was probably their best shot. The one at CHI where unfortunately they were shorthanded, but too many turnovers. They just never got Jensen and Molly. They need those two both to be on a heater to have a shot.
Right.
And that didn't happen in all 3 games. So you need your superstars to get to play at their absolute best, because again, like the talent disparity, Lauren and Morgan, like we'll talk about the conference awards, all Big East are fantastic players, 2,000 point scores. As good as the rest of the team is, like UConn's full of 4 and 5 stars. And like the further you get down the bench, the harder it is to match up. So you can't come into this game relying on Molly Mogensen or Mallory Brake to score 20 for you in order to get a win. You need your stars to be stars. And I think UConn knew that as well. It made life incredibly tough on them, and the shots just weren't falling. They 3 for 12 combined, but 3 for 13 from 3 between them.
And I think that's the next part of this conversation, that is it a UConn problem or is it Creighton against top team problem? Because we can look through their resume through their early stretch of the season, but that Creighton team that ended their non-conference to where they are now is a completely different team. It almost feels like. Do you see that moving into now their NCAA tournament berth, that this is going to be maybe that calling card that other teams will hang on Creighton saying, listen, they haven't performed well against some of the best teams in the country?
And that's the weird thing about their schedule too, is there's like no mid-tier teams.
Mm-hmm.
It's either all top 10 or all unranked. Nobody else in the conference gave them a test, and they faced some good, and obviously they went on the road and faced some good mid-major teams and things like that. Outside of it, like obviously, like I mentioned, South Dakota State ended up losing that one, but their other 5 losses are all the top 10 teams. Mm-hmm. 3 of them to UConn. I mean, most of those were top 5 teams, and then you had Kansas State. So, that we haven't really seen Creighton against a team the caliber of what they're going to see in the first round. As you look, they're projected as an 8 seed on ESPN and a 9 seed on her hoop stats. So 8-9, either way, you're going to be in that matchup where you're facing another like team. And we just haven't seen that from Creighton this year. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. And obviously you get through that first round, then you're going to face one of those top 5 caliber teams, top 10 caliber teams that Creighton hasn't shown they're capable of beating yet. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what they've learned from those matchups. Are there any tricks left that they can pull out if they were to get to that point? But first, you got to win that first round game. And
I think that's my next question for you is, what's the expectation, right? It's not what your dreams are going to go or how far you think this team in the best Roman scenario could go. Expectation, second round or second weekend?
Yeah, I think if they fall in that line where they're going to face a 1 seed in the second round, then I think it'd be hard to have expectations to get to the second weekend. That's just the way the draw looks to be playing out, again, because of the way their schedule played out. Their best win is Nebraska, who is like on the right side of the bubble. They're going to make the tournament, but they were a couple losses away from not even qualifying. So there aren't a lot of like high quality wins in there. So that they kind of set themselves up to have a really tough schedule. I think you go one and done, that will be pretty disappointing. I think a lot of coaches have talked about this, and Tony Bozzella at Seton Hall, I think in particular. And obviously we know how much respect Gino Oriama has for Creighton. They're better than their resume, I think, in terms of the quality of basketball they're able to play. But there just isn't enough on that resume to put them, maybe see them where their, I think, caliber would say. So looks like they'll be in the 8-9. I think they're probably better than a typical 8 or 9 seed.
And I'd agree. Yeah.
So that being said, you got to go out and win that game. I think that's the expectation, to give yourself a shot against the top seed, another one, see if can you finally break through in an ultimate do or die situation. So that's where I'd lay out expectations. Go get a win and then take your shot and see what happens in that second game.
Lack of depth in the Big East always seems to come back to bite at the worst times, too. Last one on the women. I want to talk, obviously, the old Big East teams and not the inclusion of the 11 members that get on the first team, because last I checked, they only play 5-on-5, but to each their own. Lauren Jensen, Morgan Molly, all Big East, obviously getting in there.
Unanimous, yeah.
How does their career need to finish out here for them maybe to feel satisfied? And obviously we're projecting. We can talk to them after it all wraps up and whatever comes in the next coming weeks and whatnot. But would those two feel completely satisfied with ending their Creighton tenure, like what we are kind of saying, that it's against one of the top teams in the country and you put up a great fight, but you still ultimately fall short?
I think so, ultimately, as long as they go out there and take their best shot and don't have any regrets in how they played. Like if you go out there and you play against a really talented team and your best just isn't good enough. Everything they've accomplished, all the time they spent with their teammates, they expressed how much they love this program, the coaching staff and everything. I think they'll be able to hold their heads high at the end of this and understand kind of what they've accomplished and what this time has meant to them. You just hope for their sake it isn't a situation where it's just non-competitive final game like that. That would hurt. I'm sure. I know how competitive those two are in particular with Jensen and Molly. So hoping for their sake that Creighton can, however it ends here, that we'll see Creighton's best out there on the court. And I think if that's the case, that they'll be happy.
Yeah, go down swinging for sure. Now let's move over to the men's side, who closed out the regular season on the right foot, and one that it felt like they really needed to finish out, especially well in that Saturday contest and the senior day activities and everything that happened at CHI against Butler. Big win there. You were there, and you, of course, had a big basketball week leading into that, too. Did it feel like a great culmination of what we were expecting, not only for maybe this regular season wrapped up in a bow, but also for 2-3 stellar careers of Creighton uniforms?
Yeah, it worked out pretty nicely as far as the senior day goes, to where, I mean, you had 27 points, 15 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks for Ryan Kalkbrenner, 23 points, 11 assists, 6 rebounds, 7 threes for Stephen Ashworth. And then Jemiah Neal, 10 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds, just kind of filling in the gaps and doing all the things that he does. So pretty darn good. 60 points, 26 rebounds, 21 assists from your 3 seniors on their senior day. Pretty impressive way for those guys to go out. Jemiah didn't have a great scoring game, but he hit the kind of the shot that allowed them to seal the game, because Butler, they made it a little stressful there at the end. There cut it down to 6 late in the game, and then Jemiah hits a pull-up 3 in transition, and that sparks an 11-2 run to where Creighton was firmly in control, and they can do the sub out for the final time and let the fans give those guys their final ovation, and the coaches and teammates can celebrate and enjoy the moment. So pretty cool. It's the way that closed out. You got to see your best players go out with fantastic performances. You got some big moments there late, and then you still got the chance to recognize your seniors in the right way. And Creighton's been pretty darn good at this. It's worked out, like some of the teams they play, but Creighton always does the post-game senior ceremony.
Yeah, they seem to be pretty good at getting a win on that day.
Yeah, there's like danger in that. But I mean, we saw the Doug McDermott jersey retirement ceremony after they had lost to Villanova and just kind of spoiled the whole night. I think Rob's note was 27 out of 30 the last 30 senior day games or whatever I think they've won.
Yeah, that's pretty good for not being able to really control what the schedule looks like. You can control when your senior day is. You do a pretty good job of that.
100%. So it was good to see that. And shout out to Sammy Osmani. Definitely gave the best speech. He had full notes on his phone, went out there, was up there for definitely. His speech was significantly longer than the amount of time he was on the court, but that was his opportunity in the spotlight, because he earned it. All the work he's put in. And that's a guy who should have been a senior last year, ended up having an injury that sidelined him for the whole year. So he came back for a 5th year to be with these guys one more year and to contribute to the program. Huge contributor. If you've ever seen their practice on scout teams, he's always he's a guy that kind of fills in a variety of roles. Like, they don't really have a lot of power forwards and a lot of big wings that play on that scout team. So he's the guy going out there and impersonating these guys in practice to give them their best look. And there's some days when he's out there cooking those guys. Yeah. So just happy for Sammy and all those guys to kind of have their moment there to address the fans. And it's always cool when senior day ends that way.
We could talk about a lot of the other things that go with the senior days, legacy talk and whatnot. I feel like we should shelve that and wait until after we get past this kind of end of season wrap up, especially with how big of a Big East tournament it's starting to kind of feel like for Creighton, especially in terms of NCAA tournament seeding. And that's where I want to ask you, where does it benefit Creighton in this NCAA tournament? Because, you know, some sports people may say Creighton's best chance at an NCAA tournament run could be losing in the first round and dropping your seed a little bit further to maybe get a better matchup. Now, you're never going to actually see that likely, but it's not like Creighton has performed expertly well in their Big East tournaments over the past few years.
Yeah, so what you're looking at right now is Creighton 22-9, 15-5 in the Big East, which, by the way, is a conference record, most conference wins that Creighton's ever had. So pretty cool accomplishment for that team. But clinched the 2 seed in the Big East tournament. They are sitting at 36 in KenPom, 38 in the net. They're 5-5 in quad 1, 6-4 in quad 2, 11-0 in quad 3 and 4. So right now they're the top 9 seed on bracket matrix. So that's, again, right, same as the women. They're in that 8-9 range where
dangerous spot.
Yeah. You're facing a like team, and then you're facing a 1 seed. So I don't know how I don't study it closely enough to know how much ground they can really make up in this Big East tournament, because, again, we've talked about the league isn't super stacked with quad 1 opportunities like
but you would think that if you get a row of wins and you take down likely Georgetown, likely UConn, maybe Villanova, and then you win over St. John's, you're the Big East champion. The highest, probably 7.
Yeah,
somewhere in there.
I would assume that they would still honor the tournament enough. Fortunately, the Big East doesn't wait until the last day of the regular season like the Big Ten, so I think you get that factored in a little bit more for your winner. But yeah, if Creighton, you pick up a win over UConn, pick up a win over St. John's, then I think you can climb yourself out of that 8-9, especially depending on what else happens in other conferences, because the other teams around you are probably going to take losses as well unless they also win their conference tournament. So I think there's still a path to get there. It's going to be tough to beat St. John's at Madison Square Garden, but if you do, like, that's a huge cap in your feather, and I think would do wonders for their resume, because that gives you another kind of blue chip win on top of the additional going 2-1 against UConn, going 2-1 against St. John's, just kind of having that on your resume. So that's kind of what's, I think, at stake here, is getting off that 8-9 seed line there.
And this is a pretty desperate Big East tournament for a lot of teams too. You've got Xavier, UConn, that not necessarily like fighting for their lives. Xavier much more than the Huskies are, but there's a lot at stake here for a lot of teams.
And you look at Creighton has struggled at times in the tournament. Their depth has always been a question. This team actually plays their bench more than basically all the other contenders that we're looking at. So that's kind of a little departure. Like, Creighton's actually played their bench quite. You're still relying on Ashworth, Kalkbrenner, and Neal for close to 40 minutes in a big game, but those guys are used to that. And then you mix in your role players to keep those guys a little fresh, match up a little bit better. So this team, I think that will help them. The fact that they've got some more pieces that they can plug in to match up with teams and maybe get some guys some breathers compared to past years. And again, compared to some of the other teams like St. John's and Marquette and Villanova, like these teams, none of these teams are deep. They play their bench less than Creighton does. So where that's normally a disadvantage, it might actually help them a little bit this year to put together a run. And the other thing, we talked about the shooting slump, and they broke out of that in a big way in the final week of the regular season. Against Seton Hall, they shot 11 of 21, the highest percentage of the season. Jackson McAndrew went 5 of 8, scored a career high 17 in that game, and he had been one that was kind of in a slump. And then they had the senior day game where they shot 16 of 37, so season high in makes. So you had your highest percentage game and your highest makes game in the last 2 games of the regular season. So now we have to see if they can carry that to a neutral site, Madison Square Garden, in tournament setting. They haven't been great in neutral sites, even on the road, although that Seton Hall game was on the road. It was against Seton Hall. So still got to make the shots, even if you get the open ones. And they finally did, which hadn't always been the case. So hopefully that gives them a little bit of confidence now going into this tournament that, like, all right, we got our shot back. We're feeling good. we get these open looks, we're going to knock them down, and that's what this team needs to do to make a run.
With as up and down as this Creighton team has been through many different stretches of the year, obviously the worst version of Creighton we have seen, that they are going to struggle shooting outside, that there may be some illness and sickness and everything else running through the program. That's, easy to see how that team ends up. What is the best version of this year's Creighton team ceiling? What do you think could they win the Big East tournament? Can they move forward past that round of 32 in the NCAA tournament? Have you seen enough to feel confident in a further and extended run for the best version of Creighton?
Yeah. For the best version, I think they've shown they're capable of getting. They beat every team in the Big East.
Right.
They didn't get swept by anybody. They're one of two teams that beat St. John's.
People forget it was early, but it did happen,
and it counts. May have only scored 57 points, but that was more than St. John's.
Still more.
So yeah, I think they go in this tournament feeling like it's going to be tough. They have to play their best, but they can beat anybody. There's nobody in this league that they can't compete with and ultimately beat. And then again, in the tournament, if you do that, then you feel pretty good about your path in the tournament. If you can get off that 8-9 line, you get to 8-9, then we're facing the same tasks that the women are likely facing, where you got to face a 1 seed in that next round. And I don't know if you feel confident going into that, but
you do have to think, if you come out of the Big East tournament, you had beaten St. John's and their defensive scrum they'll put you in. Any team that wants to match up pace for pace with Creighton, they're probably feeling pretty good about going up against.
And again, you go into a game with Kalkbrenner and Stephen Ashworth, you feel pretty good about your chance as long as you can get just enough from the other guys there. And again, this team is so volatile. They're best, like how up and down they've been. So it's not like I'm going in like, expecting a Sweet 16, Elite 8 run out of this team. I think that's within the realm of possibilities, but I don't think it's as likely, even as like last year, to make it to the second round, just because of all the situations surrounding this team. But to put themselves in this position again, losing one of your key players going into the year and having to kind of reshuffle and reassign roles, and to get to this point, I think the season has been a massive success, regardless of what happens in the tournament. And now it's about going out and taking your best shot.
Last one for you, then we'll wrap up and get out of here too. Obviously, Ryan Kalkbrenner, 4-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year. That was pretty presumed that he would get there. Also a first team All Big East member as well. One of only 5 players to actually make it. That's odd that they would do it that way, but each their own.
Well, yeah, they only name 5 because the Player of the Year doesn't actually make the first team, but they do. I don't. So it's. They're 4 pick. It's going to be Kalkbrenner, RJ Lewis, Eric Dixon, and Cameron Jones. Those were the 4 unanimous, like, no-brainer picks. Those are the 4 finalists, I guess you would say, for Player of the Year, which will be announced on Wednesday. I think it'll come down to Kalkbrenner and Lewis, but the 5th was Micah Peavy, which I think him kind of squeezing there, that makes sense. And then obviously St. John's getting 2. Because conference title winner, and I know
throw him in.
I know a lot of New York media was campaigning for 3, which has never happened in the conference. So this team wasn't that special to set that kind of precedence. Great season, Rick Pitino, fun storyline, but you weren't getting 3. And Kadari Richmond's first half of his season, that still counts. He may be looking great lately, but it took him a while to get to that point. But anyway, it's, I think, very much deserving. I have no issues with kind of the way it played out. Stephen Ashworth, I think if Creighton had won the conference, Ashworth would have been on there instead of a second Johnny. So that's just kind of, to the winner goes the spoils. That's how all these awards always work for the most part. You start with the winning teams and then go down from there. And so I think it's fair. So the question is the Player of the Year. And that's last year we saw the coaches voted most outstanding player over best team, the best player on the best team. And for comparison, last year that was Tristan Newton for UConn, is kind of the acknowledged top guy for the Huskies, for a really balanced Huskies team, but averaged about 15 points, 6.5 boards, 6 assists, only 41% from the field, 32% from 3, and UConn went 18-2. Devin Carter ended up winning it for a 10-10 Providence team because he averaged nearly 20 points a game, 9 boards a game, 3.5 assists, almost 2 steals, shooting 38% from 3, 47% from the field. And obviously he was a deep defensive, all defensive guard as well. and losing Bryce Hopkins, like the load that he carried there, very much deserving, understandable that he would get it in that situation. I think Baylor Shireman had an argument as well, but ultimately that's the way the conferences chose to go.
And also for all the New York and St. John's media that thought that they were going to get a Big East Defensive Player of the Year, I think you just have to listen to coach comments to see how this one was going to end up. But regardless, Ryan Kalkbrenner, another Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, and RJ Lewis. So the comparison last year, Lewis versus Kalkbrenner. You've got Kalkbrenner, best defensive player in the conference, acknowledged there 4 years in a row. 19.5 points a game, 9 boards a game, almost 3 blocks a game, 66% from the field, 34 from 3. Creighton went 15-5 in the Big East. RJ Lewis, who had a great season, he's made a huge leap, really improved. 18.1 points a game, 7 boards, 2 assists, 45% from the field, 31 from 3. Sub 50 effective field goal percentage. Like Kalkbrenner is he's ahead of him in scoring, which is what Lewis does. Like that's his greatest value. Is he's the leading scorer for St. John's. He goes and takes all those shots because you got other guys that acknowledge bigger part of their defense, take on the toughest assignments. Kalkbrenner obviously center versus a kind of 3-4 type of guy, but Kalkbrenner's got him in points, in rebounds. Obviously the acknowledged best defensive player in the year. More efficient scoring while scoring more. I think Ryan Kalkbrenner has clearly had a better season, and I don't think the gap is big enough that I would give it to Lewis over him. But we see that's one where it's been a little bit more split. I think Shaheen Holloway said he'd vote for RJ Lewis. Danny Hurley said he'd give it. He thought Kalkbrenner was a player of the year. So this is one where I'm going into it like I could legitimately see it going either way.
Right.
I mean, a lot of respect for Rick Pitino and what St. John's has done for years, but this is a coach's voting. We know New York, the media would probably give it to Lewis because of the Rick Pitino storyline and all that and what they've accomplished. And St. John's, it's really impressive what they've done this year. But this is an individual player of the year award. And I think, especially with the precedent set with Carter last year, Creighton's far more accomplished than Providence was last year. And Creighton also lost one of their key players. And Kalkbrenner just kind of, there was a stretch there where teams devoted their entire defense to taking him away, and Creighton found a way to kind of push through that and still have him average almost 20 a game. So, and
maybe we're a bit biased, but also numbers don't lie. So there's that too. But just another episode of Blue Jay Breakdown here for Hurrdat Sports. That's Jacob Padilla. If you're ever looking for more, check it out on all of our channels across all the social media. And we'll be back again next time to preview everything happening with the NCAA tournament.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.